It's so ridiculous. It is really a bit much. It's fun to work at this scale, but there's been a number of times where I would just give my head a shake and just be like, what was I thinking? So today I am in the process, I've painted these panels. And so the next step of that is that I've got to take the panels and put them where they're supposed to go. And then I've got a little jig that I can use to mark on the wood and also mark on the paper where I will be placing magnets and inset screws. I think part of this project too is like, you know, these are like, the art world is a really interesting place, and I think it also can be a really exclusionary place, like in a classist way, kind of way. And a lot of people don't feel like they see themselves in the contemporary art. And so in a way, this is also like an offering to that community, to a larger community, to the public, to the places I grew up, and as something that celebrates all of the iconography and all of the symbolism and that sort of thing. I would love to drive around in one, that's for sure. And I do have a total sweet spot for them. Like whenever I see one on the road, I'm like not only sort of studying it for the size and shape and the dimensions of it, but yeah, in a lot of ways, it's kind of like exposure therapy in a lot of ways. Because it's, you know, this truck is used to be pretty emblematic for me as somebody like, as this little brown kid in Nanaimo. I would just sort of, you know, let those guys have their fun and just kind of walk, not the opposite direction, but maybe the other side of the street kind of thing. But the more I've worked on this series, the more I've become like, this is becoming really personal and really me wrestling with my relationship with my ancestry and the lack thereof, and my feelings around that. Like if I feel completely connected or completely disconnected, and what that stirs up emotionally. If I could talk to my ancestors, which is what Joss Paper is, it's in a way communicating and gifting objects to your ancestors and projecting what you think they would like. And here I am sending them objects that I don't know if they would even get or understand or appreciate. And then, you know, kind of coming to terms with like those ideas of feeling embarrassed about that. Yeah, this is where I am. Yeah. It's like, yeah, it's like a postcard to the dead. Like, I don't want this project to come off like I'm like chastising this community. And I think the sort of care that I go into rendering this object, I think maybe speaks to that. It becomes like an offering. Yeah, it's not only an offering to my ancestors, but it's also an offering to a community who's been very much part of my life. So when my family moved to Nanaimo in 1984, we moved from Burlington, Ontario, and before that we moved from Dublin, Ireland. And I think when we moved to Nanaimo in the 80s, it was like moving to a very industrial town. And there, and even now, it's a truck town. What's interesting about this vehicle for me is that I always felt outside of the community that drove these vehicles, mostly because of my ethnicity. And also kind of like contextually, I didn't really kind of was part of that community. But then when I was building it, I started getting stories, really beautiful stories about what this truck meant to other people. And in a way, it became like a bridging icon for me. And it became less an intense object and kind of more diffused, and it kind of brought in all the multiplicity of what this object actually is in terms of, you know, people's relationship to it, in terms of their family or history or whatever. So it's pretty interesting that way. I think for these objects, they were very much the aha moment in the studio. I spend so much time making these objects and rendering them to be somewhat realistic, but also play with the inherent nature of watercolors. And so I get really precious about them. I love making them. And it was only in that moment where I lit it on fire and was watching it burn, and then I like quickly put it out. And it was that moment where I was like, this is really interesting, because I was kind of thinking about how they relate to Joss Paper and how it is a way of communicating with somebody. And I felt like it really kind of blew my mind, thinking about like half a Labatt's bottle showing up in the afterlife and them just being like, what is even going on here?